I made a video earlier today about the XRP ETF and whether it was a failure or not. This is because, like before, the market was selling off around the same time that the XRP ETF was a random event. I don't think so. I also talked about that. I'm pretty sure that trickery is taking place. Some people who make the markets are, just shaking things up again. Along with the good news about XRP, it definitely fits in nicely. You can call me anything you want, like a tinfoil hat user, but I feel like way too many times we've seen XRP do really well, only to have Bitcoin take over the market and ruin our fun. No matter what, though, the main thing I wanted to talk about when we talked about ETFs was how much demand there is for these goods. And I think the size of Canary Capital is the most important thing to think about when it comes to the Canary Capital XRP ETF. They don't have a big name, but they just smashed huge records. And I believe many people think it's crazy that there are 60 billion or even 100 billion XRP in circulation. They think that amount is crazy, and they believe that will always be the case, keeping the value of these old coins low. Some people are still thinking that way, even though big companies like BlackRock, which manages $10 trillion in assets, are getting into the market and talking about tokenizing every asset in the world, including real estate, which is worth more than $300 trillion. Again, this is happening right now. The process of tokenization is speeding up. A lot of stablecoin projects are also starting to come together. BlackRock and other big names have told us that soon every asset will be tokenized. It doesn't matter how many of these old coins are out there anymore. The market capitalization isn't really important when I look at the fully split value of XRP, which is based on the 100 billion supply. $126 billion, because we know that Ripple wants to go after trillions of dollars and wants XRP and the XRPL to be a part of almost all of those moves. You can't get enough. That is something I can't stress enough. This is what makes me very optimistic about the long-term future of projects like Hedera, which has a supply of 50 billion coins, and even projects with much less supply like QNT. However, I saw a news earlier today that I'd like to talk about before we get into the ETFs and how the supply of XRP on exchanges is going away. The first thing we should talk about is Evernorth. In October, we got the big news from Ashish Birla, who used to work at Ripple. I'm happy to say that we've launched Evernorth XRP, the first institutional vehicle of its kind designed to speed up the uptake of XRP. It has been up and running for over a decade, and the DeFi ecosystem is growing quickly. XRP is ready to be used, and Evernorth is ready for when that time comes. We are also seeing a lot of big changes happen quickly in the XRP environment. One of the most important is that institutions are starting to use it, but also DeFi and institutions. DeFi and institutions is becoming a fact. There are already big players in this market that are tokenizing and committed to safe coin projects. Adding DeFi is the next step in that process. Most likely there will be institutional liquidity pools where people can give and borrow money around certain assets. A lot of people seem to be missing how big institutional DeFi will be, especially since the biggest names are already here tokenizing, as I said. Also, the XRP ledger was made just for this moment. In this case, I'm very excited about where XRP and the XRPL are going. Then there was the $200 million investment that was just made in Evernorth. It has to do with SBI Group. They are putting $200 million into Evernorth, which is the biggest public XRP treasury business. A lot of improvements have been made around Evernorth. I do believe that this will be one of the biggest projects, if you want to call it that. I believe this is one of the most important changes taking place in the XRP system. I'm really happy to see some of the latest news about treasury companies and their big growth plans. It could be those who work on DAP or even the EVM sidechain. All of this adds to the fact that we were already optimistic about XRP. All of this really supports XRP and the XRPL, which makes me even more optimistic about the future. This is because these events will cause important parts of the XRP ecosystem to grow, such as institutional DeFi and other areas. That being said, I'd like to talk about ETFs because they are a way for institutions to invest in XRP, which also makes institutional demand for XRP stronger. When you look at the XRP ETF from Canary Capital, you should know that Canary is not a very big name. As we think about Canary, I remember when they first said they were going to start offering ETFs, everyone was like, is Canary Capital really that big of a name? Well, they're not a very well-known company, but the fact that a small company like this got over $250 million in market value linked to the XRP ETF already tells us how much people want XRP. 109 million XRPs have already been locked up by Canary Capital. I know that doesn't sound like much, especially since there are 60 billion XRP in circulation, but this is just one name. Vincent Kennedy wrote a great post. Okay, Vincent Crypt 46 over on X, Bitwise, Solana ETF, and BSOL made $57 million at start. Bitwise is in charge of about $15 billion in assets. XRPC, Canary Capital's XRP ETF, did $58 million when it first came out. Canary is in charge of assets worth less than $100 million. We at Bitwise put in for an XRP ETF. This is only the beginning. As you can see, this is what I mean when I talk about how big Canary is compared to these other ETF producers. Yes, Franklin Templeton is another one that manages $1.6 trillion in assets and has an XRP ETF that is waiting to be approved. A lot of big stars know this name. Franklin Templeton is known in retail. If Franklin Templeton approves an ETF or XRP, even if it's just Bitwise, I think it will be bigger than Canary because it has a bigger name. The name is better known. That's why this start seems 10 times bigger when we think about it. Okay, I don't care about the $58 million at start. The $58 million at start doesn't bother me. I don't care that $250 million is already linked to this. It's important to me that a big name like Canary Capital recorded this. That's important to me. It's crazy to think about how well this start from a company called Canary did. What does that make us think about? How has the market responded? What changes have been made to the stock on exchanges? We can now see that Canary is buying these shares over the counter to back this ETF. Where the quantity on exchanges starts to drop is at this point. Coin Bureau put this up earlier today. The amount of XRP available on exchanges dropped sharply. In just 24 hours, over 149 million XRP worth about 336 million left centralized platforms. What could it be? What's going on here? Let's give it some thought, shall we? The ETF is here, right? Because of the ETF, there are definitely a lot of sales going on. That is without a doubt a big one. The drop in the market is another one. This could cause whales to buy a lot of XRP, which would take it off of exchanges. At the same time, big buys for the ETF would also take it off of exchanges.